Nuclear war wasn't just science fiction. It was the nightmare that felt one wrong button away from becoming real. Hollywood knew this and didn't give us escapist fantasy. It handed us gut punches. The kind of stories that left viewers sweating in their living rooms, wondering if the end was closer than anyone dared admit. So, which films dared to look straight into the abyss and refused to blink? Let's begin. The day after 1983. Imagine turning on your television expecting a drama and instead being dragged into the apocalypse. That's what happened when ABC aired The Day After in 1983. This wasn't a glossy blockbuster. It was a raw, relentless look at what would actually happen if nuclear bombs struck America's heartland. No aliens, no futuristic lasers, just ordinary people in Kansas facing the unthinkable. The story follows families, farmers, students, and doctors as their lives are shredded apart when nuclear missiles slam into the Midwest. Hospitals overflow, families scatter. A once thriving town slowly slips into nuclear winter. What made it so bone-chilling was the realism. There weren't any heroic speeches or action hero rescues, just the quiet horror of neighbors turning to ash and children gasping for air in crowded shelters. Over 100 million Americans watched the broadcast. That's nearly half the country at the time. Schools and churches scrambled to hold discussions the next day because people were shaken to their core. Even President Ronald Reagan confessed in his diary that the movie depressed him deeply. The Pentagon hated it because it showed nuclear war beginning by accident, not by Soviet aggression. But director Nicholas Meyer refused to sugarcoat. For audiences, The Day After wasn't just entertainment. It was a televised trauma. Viewers sat in silence after the credits rolled, staring at their screens, questioning whether their world could vanish just as quickly. This film didn't just terrify. It forced America to confront the possibility that the end might come, not with a bang in some far-off future, but with one silent order already in the system. Testament, 1983. If The Day After rattled the country, Testament sank straight into the heart. Released the same year, this haunting drama took a completely different approach. There are no explosions on screen, no mushroom clouds. Instead, Testament quietly unfolds inside a small California town after the bombs have already fallen. The terror isn't in what you see, it's in what you don't. The film zeroes in on one family, led by Jane Alexander, in a devastating performance. She plays a mother trying to hold her children together as the outside world collapses in slow motion. Neighbors disappear, supplies vanish, the air itself becomes poison. Yet inside the home, the family clings to scraps of dignity. They host small birthday parties, recite poems, and pretend, if only for a few hours, that the world hasn't ended. What makes it unbearable is the restraint. You don't see the war. You don't even know exactly how it started. The horror comes from the silence, the gradual sickness creeping into the children's bodies, the way hope dies not in a fireball, but in a whisper. It's less spectacle, more heartbreak, and it hits like a knife. Critics were stunned. Roger Ebert called it one of the most powerful films he'd ever seen, admitting it made him cry twice. Paramount was so struck by its raw power that they gave it a theatrical release, even though it was originally made for television. For many viewers, its quiet despair was far more haunting than any big-budget apocalypse because it looked like real life unraveling at the seams. Testament doesn't scream, it whispers. And sometimes whispers are the scariest sound of all. Miracle Mile, 1988. Sometimes terror doesn't come with mushroom clouds, it comes with a ringing payphone. That's the genius of Miracle Mile, a film that starts like a quirky love story and suddenly freefalls into panic. Anthony Edwards plays Harry, a guy who just met the girl of his dreams. But then, late one night, he answers a call meant for someone else. On the line, a frantic voice screaming that nuclear missiles are already on the way to obliterate Los Angeles. From that moment, the movie never lets go. Shot almost in real time, Miracle Mile throws you into the chaos of a city unraveling. Rumors spread like wildfire. One phone call becomes riots, looting, and stampedes of terrified people. Harry races through streets that feel increasingly like a war zone, trying desperately to find his girlfriend before the end. But the beauty of the film is that you're never entirely sure if it's real or just mass hysteria. The dread comes from not knowing. Director Steve DeJarnette famously refused studio pressure to add a happy ending. The bleak finale, two lovers trapped under the city as the world collapses, is the gut punch that makes Miracle Mile unforgettable. Critics later praised it as one of the darkest love stories ever filmed. Audiences who stumbled upon it late at night often described the experience as feeling like they'd woken up inside a nightmare they couldn't shake. Miracle Mile isn't about the bombs. It's about what happens when people believe the bombs are coming. The panic, the chaos, the way society collapses in hours. And that's why it sticks. It shows us how fragile civilization really is. How one wrong call, one whispered rumor, could be enough to end everything. Special Bulletin, 1983. 9 months before, the day after traumatized America, NBC pulled off one of the boldest stunts in television history. Special Bulletin wasn't a typical movie. It was staged like a live news broadcast. Viewers in Charleston, South Carolina, tuned in to see what looked like reporters covering a labor dispute. But the situation escalated quickly. Terrorists had smuggled in a homemade nuclear device and were threatening to detonate it if their demands weren't met. The brilliance was in the presentation. Handheld cameras, news anchors struggling to maintain composure, and field reporters yelling over static. It all felt authentic, so authentic that many viewers thought it was real. Even though disclaimers flashed across the screen, reminding people it was a dramatization, phone lines across the South lit up with terrified calls. Families huddled around their TVs, convinced they were watching the start of World War III unfold live. The film didn't pull its punches. The terrorist threats escalated, the government stalled, and the ending was catastrophic. No last-second rescue, no miracle solution, just a mushroom cloud where Charleston used to be. It was shocking, raw, and deeply unsettling. Special Bulletin went on to win Emmys and critical praise, but it also raised questions about media responsibility. How far should TV go in blurring the line between fact and fiction? For viewers who lived through it, the answer was simple. This was as close as America ever came to mistaking a movie for the nightly news. And that, in itself, was terrifying. On the Beach, 1959. Hollywood in the 1950s wasn't known for bleakness. Audiences wanted optimism, happy endings, and heroes. Then along came On the Beach, a haunting film that threw all of that out the window. Set in the aftermath of nuclear war, it doesn't show explosions. The bombs have already fallen. The northern hemisphere is gone. Radiation is drifting south, and in Australia, what's left of humanity waits for the inevitable. Gregory Peck stars as a submarine captain, stoic and resigned. Ava Gardner delivers one of her most heartbreaking performances. And Fred Astaire, yes, the legendary dancer, shows up not to charm, but to embody despair. The characters cling to everyday routines. They drink, drive cars, fall in love, and pretend life is normal, but every line, every scene is weighted with the knowledge that time is running out. What makes On the Beach devastating isn't spectacle, it's inevitability. There's no secret weapon, no daring rescue, no chance of survival. Just the slow, suffocating awareness that the end is unavoidable. Audiences in 1959 didn't know what to make of it. Some critics called it un-American for refusing to offer hope. Even President Eisenhower reportedly hated it, but others praised its brutal honesty. Over the years, On the Beach has endured as one of the most haunting nuclear dramas ever made. It forces you to ask the hardest question. If you knew the end was coming and nothing could stop it, how would you spend your final days? For many, that's the scariest scenario of all. By Dawn's Early Light, 1990. By the late 1980s, the Cold War was winding down. People thought the nuclear nightmare was finally fading. Then, HBO came along with By Dawn's Early Light in 1990, a TV movie that reminded everyone just how fragile peace really was. Forget explosions in city streets. This was a claustrophobic thriller about command centers, fighter pilots, and a fractured chain of command staring into the abyss. The story begins when a rogue Soviet faction launches a nuclear strike to ignite chaos. Washington scrambles, but the government itself fractures under the weight of impossible decisions. Martin Landau plays the U.S. president, torn between retaliation and restraint. James Earl Jones adds gravity as a military commander trying to maintain control, while Powers Booth and Rebecca De Mornay give the pilot's perspective, strapped into cockpits as the world teeters on annihilation. What makes the film so gripping is its realism. There are no wild villains, no sci-fi gadgets, just humans stumbling through a nightmare of their own making. Command rooms buzz with panic. Leaders argue over the meaning of deterrence while knowing every move could kill millions. And in the air, pilots wait for orders they pray never come. Critics praise By Dawn's early light for its credibility. It felt all too possible. For many viewers, it was the last truly great Cold War nuclear thriller, a sobering reminder that the end of the world might not come from malice, but from mistakes, miscommunication, and ego. If The Day After was a national trauma, By Dawn's early light was a late warning that the danger never fully went away. Panic in Year Zero, 1962. Before zombie shows and survivalist epics, there was Panic in Year Zero, a low-budget 1962 shocker that hit closer to home than audiences expected. Directed by and starring Ray Milland, it follows a family heading out on a camping trip just as nuclear bombs rain down on Los Angeles. Suddenly, the highways clog, the city burns, and survival becomes a test of morality. At first, Milland's character is just a father trying to protect his wife and kids. But as society unravels, kindness turns into a liability. He stockpiles supplies, brandishes weapons, and adopts a cold ruthlessness to keep his family alive. The message is bleak. When the veneer of civilization cracks, people become predators. Critics at the time dismissed the film as exploitation, but history has been kinder. Watching it now, it feels eerily prophetic. Long before The Walking Dead or modern prepper culture, Panic in Year Zero warned that the real danger after the bombs isn't radiation, it's human desperation. Neighbors turn into threats, strangers become enemies, and survival demands choices that shred morality. For 1962 audiences, still adjusting to fallout drills and Cold War tension, this was nightmare fuel. It wasn't just about nuclear war, it was about what we'd become afterward. In that sense, Panic in Year Zero wasn't just pulp cinema, it was a grim mirror, and sometimes the mirror is scarier than the mushroom cloud. The Bedford Incident, 1965. Nuclear war doesn't always start with missiles. It can begin with pride, paranoia, and one bad decision. That's the terrifying lesson of the Bedford Incident, a tense 1965 thriller set almost entirely aboard a U.S. destroyer, shadowing a Soviet submarine. Richard Widmark stars as the hard-nosed captain, determined to outmaneuver his Cold War adversaries. Sidney Poitier plays a journalist on board, documenting a crew wound tighter and tighter as the standoff escalates. What begins as a routine game of cat and mouse spirals into something far more dangerous. Orders get misinterpreted, pride overrides caution, and one misstep pushes everyone toward irreversible catastrophe. The film's brilliance lies in its restraint. There are no big explosions until the very end. The suspense builds through silence, sharp glances, and the suffocating realization that no one can back down. By the time the final twist hits, the audience feels as trapped and doomed as the crew itself. Critics called it a companion piece to Fail Safe, another masterpiece of nuclear tension, but with a more psychological edge. Where Failsafe focused on political systems breaking down, the Bedford Incident drilled into human pride and paranoia. The result? A film that proved you don't need mushroom clouds on screen to terrify. All you need is the unbearable weight of men realizing too late that they've pushed the world over the edge. Countdown to Looking Glass, 1984. If Special Bulletin blurred the line between news and drama, Countdown to Looking Glass smashed it to pieces. This Canadian-American TV film aired on HBO in 1984, and it didn't look like a movie at all. It played out like real-time news coverage, with anchors calmly reporting as a global crisis unraveled. Viewers saw financial collapse in South America spiral into military clashes between the United States and the Soviet Union. No explosions, no sci-fi spectacle, just news desks, field reporters, and grim headlines. That's what made it terrifying. The anchors' steady voices were eerily believable, and the expert panels debating on air looked exactly like the real thing. Government officials issued vague reassurances, while in the background, panic built and options ran out. Then, almost without fanfare, the nightmare became real. The world slid into nuclear war, not with a bang on screen, but with a chilling realization in the newsroom that nothing could stop it. Audiences were rattled because it felt less like fiction and more like a rehearsal for Armageddon. You weren't watching characters, you were watching the exact people you'd normally trust to guide you through a crisis. Only this time, their calm voices masked the end of everything. Critics praised the film for its realism, while viewers were left shaken by the thought, if the bombs ever fell, we'd probably find out from a newscaster struggling to keep his composure. Countdown to Looking Glass terrified, because it didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like a test run, and tests don't always stay pretend. Damnation Alley, 1977. Most nuclear films go for grim realism. Damnation Alley went for something stranger, a post-apocalyptic road trip. Released in 1977, it followed a ragtag group of survivors crossing a radioactive wasteland in a massive armored vehicle called the Landmaster. On the surface, it sounds like pulp, and, yes, the special effects were mocked. But beneath the camp is something darker that stuck with audiences. The bombs have already fallen, and Earth itself has been thrown off its axis. The landscape is mutated and unrecognizable. Giant cockroaches devour people alive. Deadly storms rip across deserts. Every mile feels like a new death trap. George Peppard and John Michael Vincent lead the crew as they search for any remaining pockets of civilization in a country that barely resembles America. Critics weren't impressed at the time, dismissing the movie as a cheesy misfire, but for the kids who caught it on late-night television, the imagery seared into their minds. Those endless storms, those swarms of creatures. It was nightmare fuel wrapped in a B-movie shell. Over the years, Damnation Alley built a cult, following precisely because it's so bizarre. It may not have the prestige of The Day After or the artistry of On the Beach, but it captured something essential, the idea that survival after nuclear war might not be worth it, because what's left could be worse than the end itself. The Atomic Cafe, 1982. Sometimes the scariest nuclear film doesn't invent anything. It just shows you what really happened. The Atomic Cafe, released in 1982, is a darkly comic documentary stitched together from government propaganda films, military training shorts, and newsreels from the 1940s and 1950s. And it doesn't add narration. It doesn't need to. The footage speaks for itself. You see school children ducking under desks, told a slab of wood would protect them from a fireball. Soldiers marched toward blast zones with smiles, as if radiation was no big deal. Cheerful announcers promised nuclear safety while entire islands vanished in test explosions. The contrast is absurd, surreal, and horrifying. A cartoon turtle cheerfully explains fallout while mushroom clouds bloom in the background. It's all real, and that's what makes it terrifying. Critics praised the documentary for its biting satire, but underneath the humor was a devastating truth. People were manipulated into thinking the bomb was just another tool of progress. Instead of honest warnings, citizens got cartoons and pep talks, while the military vaporized test sites and left entire communities poisoned. The Atomic Cafe doesn't show the end of the world. It shows how dangerously close we came, all with a smile plastered on our faces. Watching it decades later, the cheerful tone only makes it more chilling. Because the scariest thing isn't the mushroom cloud, it's how easy it was to convince people to live with one hanging over their heads. Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, 1964. Not all nuclear war films leave you crying. Some leave you laughing nervously, then realizing the joke is on us. Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove is the masterpiece that turned Armageddon into a black comedy. Released in 1964, at the height of Cold War paranoia, it dared to show how one unhinged general, a malfunctioning system, and sheer human incompetence could set off the end of the world. Peter Sellers played not one, not two, but 3 roles, including the unforgettable Doctor. Strangelove, a wheelchair-bound ex-Nazi scientist who can't control his own arm. George C. Scott chewed through dialogue as a gung-ho general, while Sterling Hayden embodied paranoia turned lethal. The war room sequences are legendary, especially the line, "Gentlemen, you can't fight in here." This is the war room. Audiences didn't know whether to laugh, scream, or both. Kubrick's genius was in exposing the absurdity of nuclear deterrence. The doomsday machine wasn't science fiction. It was a metaphor for real Cold War strategies that could destroy humanity by accident. The film's ending is both hilarious and horrifying. Mushroom clouds rising across the globe as Vera Lynn's "We'll Meet Again" plays in the background. A sweet, sentimental song married to total annihilation. Critics hailed it as one of the greatest satires ever made, and it remains just as relevant today. Because Dr. Strangelove reminds us that the scariest thing about the bomb isn't malice or villains. It's the simple fact that human error, arrogance, and madness can be just as deadly. Sometimes the only way to face that horror is to laugh, and then the laugh catches in your throat. Nuclear war films weren't just entertainment. They were warning shots. Some terrified presidents, others tricked entire cities, and a few left audiences staring at their ceilings, wondering if the hope was even possible. Together they proved one thing: the real danger isn't just the bomb itself, but the people trusted to control it. Which of these shook you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and let's keep this conversation burning long after the credits roll.